Hey, you ever get the urge to just build something that you really don't need to? Dave Osland here. So, I built these gates 23 years ago when I built the home. I'm just wanting to do something different. So, I'm going to take these gates off and build some wrought iron gates to enhance the entryway. So, let's see what happens. Here's the plans I drew up on AutoCAD for the new gates. I'm using 4-inch rings between 3/4-inch pickets. So I've got a square punch on this iron worker. I'm going to punch 13/16 by 13/16 hole every 4 1/16 inch to allow balusters to come up and fit a 4-inch ring between them. So here's my piece punched with the 13 by 13 holes. Again, I'm going to be using 3/4 by 3/4 balusters, but you want a little play, especially because I'm going to bend a slight arch in this thing. And so I've cut it a little long, and so I can cut it after I bend it. I can cut it as to length I need, and obviously I'm not sure exactly. If I was to cut it exactly the length right now and then bend it, it's probably going to be off. So I'll bend it first, then cut it to length. Okay, I'm bending these 2 top rails on the Hosfeld. Old mechanical machine, but they still work great. So using my Hosfeld, I've got these bent, lined up pretty good. It's one thing bending one piece of iron. It's another thing, especially when you're doing it kind of on a, hand-run contraption, to get them exactly like I had to put them in and out there a few times, compare them. They're maybe an 1/8 inch off. You'll never notice that when the gate's done. So I've got my 2 pieces, my 2 top rails notched and cut. I've got them laid out on a great big square table. It's a piece of 1-inch 6061 aluminum, so I know it's dead flat and square. Now I have to start putting these pieces together. I'm going to bring some 1-inch by 2-inch tubing in there. So I have to cut this little thing off here so I can slide it in there. I'm going to use a angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. So let's see, I've cut them pretty dang good. So I notched that, did all that notching and work with the little handy dandy angle grinder. So here's my weapon of choice for cutting my material. It's a carbide blade, often like a wood blade, but they're designed a little different. They turn a lot slower RPM, and the pitch on the blade is somewhat different than a wooden miter box. Unfortunately, these saws are dinosaurs compared to the wood miter boxes, which you can swing left or right, do compound miter cuts. These pretty much you can cut from 0 to 45 on them. Remember, you want to make sure that if you're doing 45, that material's laying dead flat on the bed, as well as this thing is really locked in here tight, because that saw wants to grab that metal and shove it this way. So let's avoid that. Watch your ears, watch your eyes. Time for some tack welds. We got it tacked up here. So I've got these things tacked together, and again, Mr. Impatient, I usually like to weld a lot of stuff, but the tacks make it very handy if in case I screwed up, which I do quite often. Oh, yeah. Okay, let's see what happens here. I like to cut off those little stubs there. Watch your eyes. And an inside corner weld here. Here's a close-up of that weld. Inside welds, you want to do a nice job because there's no way to get in there and clean them up with a grinder very easily. So obviously, if I don't clean these up now, once there are pickets in here, it's going to be a bear. So learning the hard way where I'm actually getting it smart here. So I've got my corners, everything welded up. I used a flap disc with a 40 grit, clean everything up. Of course, if you use a flap disc, you'll realize that the 40 grit in a matter of minutes is more like a 60 or 80. But clean the other one up, it's ready to start putting pickets in. So if you wonder why I mentioned angle grinders, cutting wheel, wire brush, cut-off wheel, flap sander. You know, can you have too many tools? I don't know. Plus, arsenal of clamps. Here's one of my favorite little tools in the shop. Little Miller 135, 110 volt. But boy, have I built a lot of stuff with this little thing. Okay, time to start cutting some pickets here. Here we go. Watch your eyes. Okay, it's time to assemble some stuff here. I can float these up and down as I need to. Just like painting, there's always a lot of prep here. And before I'm putting these pickets in here, I'm giving them a quick hit with this flat disc because it's a lot easier now than later on. So I'm on day 2 now of this. I've got this frame pretty much assembled. I'm going to start tacking these pickets in place and then eventually get my collar set where I want and fit those 1/2 by 4-inch rings in there. So again, because I'm notorious for screwing up and then getting ahead of myself, I'm just going to tack these in place. Couple of tips. If you're MIG welding is very sensitive to a proper ground. If I was to ground it here, and these are a little loose in here, it could affect the quality of my weld. So I'm grounding it straight to the actual piece I'm welding. I've got a couple spacers in here to separate this to the proper distance in here I want to have. Yeah, ready to tack this bad boy. Start out with a nice fresh piece of metal on here. Voila. Couple little tips here. So this stuff is like 20 gauge steel. This is almost 1/10 of an inch. Much thicker, over double what this is. Anytime you're welding two dissimilar thicknesses of metal, you either run it hot enough to melt the heavier one and it's too hot and it burns holes in the smaller stuff, or vice versa. So you have to find that happy medium. I tend to run it still a little on the hot side because I need the penetration in the larger stuff. But instead of going, say, at a 45, I will actually lay the wire closer to this piece and put more heat into this. And in the process of this piece melting, this one will fuse. So if it's close enough, you know, to this piece is going to melt just because it's thinner. Also, when you're welding, you can see right there I've got about 3/4 of an inch of stick out. Again, MIG is very sensitive to the length of stick out when they're talking about stick out. And what they're talking is from this contact tip to the metal should be approximately 3/8 of an inch. If you're really close, you'll melt the metal and totally bugger up your electrode contact tip and have to replace it. Or if you're too far out, you'll get a spatter, you won't get a great weld. So stick out's very important on MIG welding, as well as the contact, as well as the ground. My very last piece, I'm going to have to cut, fit it in there. And again, my handy dandy little angle grinder, watch your eyes. This is about $1 a blade. All right, let's see what happens here. Before I get a little far too ahead of myself, take another one of my handy little implements I can put on these angle grinders. Just gonna clean all these welds up real quick. Again, I may be getting ahead of myself a little bit for cleaning this. When you powder coat these things, they sandblast everything. But just as a general working procedure. I like to keep things pretty clean as I go along. Because you know how it is, you think you're done and all of a sudden you realize I got all this extra stuff to do. So anyway, continue on here. So now I'm going to tack all these from the lower side so I don't even have to ever see a weld. Another quick tip for MIG welding is because wire's being pushed through this from the machine, you don't want a lot of tight kinks in it because it's going to restrict the ease of that wire flowing through here. It's always a question, should I weld them on the side, weld them on the front where it's not going to be noticed so much? My feeling is your welds are pretty darn clean. By the time it's powder coated, that one's a little funky. I'll take a little, probably actually take the edge of my cutoff wheel and clean those up because it's like, cutoff wheel is not designed to grind, but if you use it very delicately, it can be done, and it's kind of like a precision micro tool for that type of stuff. So let's take a gander at what I've got here so far. I've got this thing pretty well tacked together. Now I will want to go up, turn this thing upside down so I don't have to do any overhead welding, and weld up into here and here and here. My thought on this kind of stuff, sooner or later some kid or myself is going to have to climb over this sucker, and I don't want it popping apart anyplace. Let's take a look-see and see where we're at. Got everything except the finials or the little tridents put on the top. I'll do that later on. So it's time for the other second half of that 8-foot opening. These are approximately 4 feet wide. Oh, and did I mention the versatility of these angle grinders? Here again is a cut brush as opposed to a flat brush. It's going to allow me to get into these little tight areas in here. So it's time to get these little picket points put on. Sometimes you call them finials. You have tridents. Anyway, this is it. So I've got to space it up. I've got to line it up as close as I can to square and level and give it a little shot. Well, let's take a look at it. If you can see with all the busyness in the background, there's half the opening of the 8-foot opening there. Time to get a latch fabricated, hinges cut and put on, take it over to the job site, make sure it fits, and then get it to the powder coater. Let's take a look at what I got here. I've noticed one little screw up I did. The rings on that side when I assemble, I welded this side. This side I welded them on the other. So what do? Add some welds over here to match that side. Have to scratch my head over that one. Cut a few little pieces here. I want to make a latch that looks like a handmade wrought iron latch. Slightly handmade. I used a drill press to drill the holes. I used a welder to put this little top piece on, but I'm gonna heat them up, bend them around, distress them a little bit. It'll be a custom made latch. Could fire up the forge, but yeah, a lot of energy, a lot of hassle for a little bit of heat. And what I'm gonna do is just use a torch. This is actually propane rather than acetylene. Several years ago, the main plant that made acetylene in the United States, I think it was in Kentucky, blew up. They had to start importing it from Brazil, and of course the price tripled and never went down. I think I'm going to heat this thing up good and red hot and do a little bit of hillbilly distressing. Texture to it. Gonna heat up this other end now. We're looking at the back side of this latch. I'm going to weld this little teeny thumb pole there, or finger pole, from the back side. You can see it's a recessed. I can do what we call a plug weld there, grind it off. You'll never see it from the front. So flipping it over, back side, front side, I'm going to cut this off now. Much easier to cut it off than finagling a little piece of metal to try to get it in there. I cut this off, yeah, and I'm aware that I don't have the guard on here, so save your comments. And a mock fit up here. Just a simple latch that's going to flip up and back. Sometimes I start a little pilot hole, so these will kind of not drift around, but let's see what happens. Bingo. Paint those black, Burleytown. Okay, so I've got the dry fit put together, got the hinges on, the cane bolt in. You know, there's always things to do. I had to actually modify this cane bolt, the mounts on a little bit. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. One thing I've noticed, see the welds on this thing? They burn into the 095 wall, but it's either I got to preheat this or I'm going to have to turn my settings up and zap these a little hotter. It's kind of got me paranoid a little bit. I noticed one of the collars somewhere is loose too. But anyway, so here's my little latch. Take a look, see. Yeah, so we're probably going to have it powder coated dark, maybe black, dark bronze to match that handrail. Have the handrail redone too. pretty happy. My wife likes it, so happy wife, happy life, right? Ooh, I need a little oil in those hinges. The total cost on this job, I had about $500 in materials, $500 in the powder coat, and about 24 hours in the fabrication and running around getting everything. Thanks for watching.